Okay, let's dive into a source with a pretty radical proposal. I mean, what if we rebuilt our entire global system from the ground up? And what if we combine science, spirituality, and even blockchain to do it? It is a really bold vision, so let's unpack it together.
So the whole idea really kicks off with this fundamental question. The author looks at our current global institutions, especially the UN, and just asks, point blank, are they still the right tools for the job here in the 21st century?
So, why the call for such a massive change in the first place? Well, the argument is that we're living through a pretty unique period of crisis. The source points to the incredible disruption of the COVID-19 pandemic and this growing fear of a third world war as proof that we've entered a critical period. They even give it a name, the feared lost decade. It's this time where our old systems are just clearly under a huge amount of strain. And this quote right here, this really crystallizes the core idea. The argument isn't that the UN is useless, not at all. It's that its charter is incomplete. It needs an update, An alternative charter that brings communities directly into the picture. Okay, so if the current system has some serious gaps, what's the proposed fix? The author calls it a new charter. Let's take a look at what that actually means. Now, the key thing to get here is that the source isn't suggesting we tear down the UN. Instead, the idea is to supplement it, to run a new, parallel charter right alongside the existing one, specifically to fill in those gaps. And this is where the proposal gets really ambitious. This new charter isn't just about politics. It's about creating a truly holistic system. The idea is to weave in modern, decentralized tech like blockchain for organizing at the local level, while also formally recognizing the power of these long-standing sacred governance structures. It's this big attempt to build a bridge between science and spirituality, and to empower communities to solve problems from the bottom up. So the author's whole vision for this new charter, it rests on three distinct but interconnected pillars of governance. Let's break them down one by one. So pillar number one is the one we're all familiar with, the United Nations. In this framework, it's categorized as the UNO secular. That's the system that represents nations and operates on mainstream scientific principles. Now, the second pillar introduces a player you might not be as familiar with, the Parliament of the World's Religions, or PoWR. This represents what the author calls sacred systems. So think about faith-based governance structures, something like the Vatican, that operate on tradition and values at a community or even a state level. And the third pillar? Well, that brings us right into the modern era, blockchain technology. This represents a completely decentralized, community-driven approach to organization, operating at the city and even at hyper-local level. This table really pulls it all together. You can see the three pillars all lined up with their focus levels, from nations down to states, down to cities. But check out that third column, associated stream. This is a really key concept. The author links the UN to what they call universal constant streams. Things like science, which are based on fixed laws. But then POWR is linked to universal variable streams, like religion, which are based on more subjective values and beliefs. So that raises a huge question, right? How could three incredibly different systems, a secular body of nations, a sacred parliament of religions, and a decentralized digital technology, how could they ever work together? Well, the author proposes a pretty fascinating bridge. And that proposed bridge is a concept called cymatics. It's the study of how sound and vibration create visible patterns. The author's logic here is that since vibration is a fundamental principle in both physics, that's the science part, and in many spiritual traditions, that's the faith part, it can act as a kind of universal language to connect these two seemingly separate worlds. So, according to the source, our world is basically split between these two worldviews. On one side, you've got the universal constant streams, things like science and math that deal with fixed, objective values. And on the other side, you've got the universal variable streams, things like religion, music, and art that deal with variable, subjective values. So here's the crucial step in the logic. Cymatics is presented as the universal coefficient stream. You can almost think of it like a translator. It's not strictly science, and it's not strictly religion, but it's the link, the coefficient, if you will, that allows these two very different systems to communicate and actually work together. The author uses this really powerful analogy to explain the idea. They suggest a formula. You take chemistry, which is a constant science, you add cymatics, the bridge, and what you get is a new form of alchemy. It's a really cool metaphor for a new system that can combine objective facts with subjective meaning. And this entire massive framework is held together by an overarching philosophy that the author calls philosophology. Just breaking down the name itself tells you everything you need to know. It's a very explicit attempt to create a unified model for education and for governance by combining philosophy, that's the phil, the concept of self from world religions, that's the self, and of course science, which is the ology. And you can see right here how those three pillars we talked about map directly onto this philosophy. The philosophy part is the high-level governance. The self is represented by all the community identities found in power. And the science, or ology, that's the organizational structure of the UN and of blockchain. Ultimately, the goal is a practical one. This quote points to a vision where decentralized communities are empowered to contribute directly to global progress, even in areas like intellectual property and patents, which have traditionally been the domain of giant nations and corporations.
And that's really the powerful question this source leaves us with. It's a complex, it's an ambitious, and yeah, maybe even a strange proposal. But it forces us to ask, what new possibilities could emerge if we just stopped seeing these fundamental parts of human experience as separate, and instead started building systems designed to connect them?